Welcome to Traveling Kangaroo. Today we're exploring one of the most important debates facing the United States and Puerto Rico. Should Puerto Rico become a United States state, remain a territory, pursue independence, or choose a free association? This is a complex, emotional, and consequential decision that could reshape politics, economics, and culture for millions of people. Stay with me. By the end, you'll have a clear, balanced view of the options and their trade-offs. Puerto Rico's story with the United States begins in 1898 after the Spanish-American War. In 1917, Puerto Ricans were granted United States citizenship. In 1952, the island adopted the Commonwealth status, also called Estado Libre Asociado. Since then, Puerto Rico has held multiple referendums about its political future, but no final change has taken place because Congress must act. Right now, Puerto Rico is an unincorporated United States territory. Residents are United States citizens, but they lack full voting representation in Congress and cannot vote in presidential elections unless they live in a United States state. Let's start with what statehood would actually change. If Puerto Rico became a state, it would gain 2 United States senators and several House seats based on population, commonly estimated around 5 representatives, and Puerto Ricans would be able to vote in presidential elections. That's political enfranchisement on a large scale, about 3 million people gaining full representation in national government. Economically, statehood would mean fuller integration into the federal tax system. Puerto Rican residents would generally pay federal income tax and, in return, would gain full access to federal programs, more funding for healthcare, education, infrastructure, disaster relief, and social services. But statehood also has financial downsides. Paying federal income taxes could strain households and local businesses after years of partial exemptions. Regulatory convergence and new tax rules could disrupt existing industries and incentives. Now let's talk culture and identity. Puerto Rico is rich in history, traditions, and language. Spanish is the dominant language and cultural identity is strong. Many Puerto Ricans worry statehood could encourage cultural assimilation or place pressure to adopt English as the primary language for government and education. There are other paths besides statehood. Independence would mean full sovereignty. Puerto Rico would control its laws, borders, currency, and foreign policy. That appeals to those who prioritize national identity and political self-determination. But independence would likely mean losing automatic access to federal funds and could cause significant economic upheaval unless carefully negotiated. Free association or an associated state is kind of a middle option. Puerto Rico would become an independent nation, but still negotiate responsibilities with the United States, like defense and monetary arrangements. This setup could help preserve cultural and political autonomy, while also keeping some important ties. But, it really depends on precise mutually agreed negotiations and a commitment to long-term stability. Remaining a territory basically keeps the status quo. That means limited representation, partial federal benefits, and honestly, ongoing uncertainty. A lot of residents just don't like the lack of finality or the second-class status that comes with it. Over time, referendums have shown shifts in public opinion, but Congress ultimately has the final say. And historically, that's where progress has kind of stalled. Let's break down the pros and cons of each option so the differences are clear. Starting with statehood, here are the pros. Puerto Rico would have full voting representation in Congress, including 2 senators and multiple representatives. Residents would also gain the right to vote in presidential elections. There'd be access to full federal funding for programs, infrastructure, healthcare, and disaster relief, and potentially there'd be stronger economic stability thanks to federal support. So, let's talk about some of the drawbacks of statehood. Residents would generally have to pay federal income taxes, which, could increase the financial burden for a lot of people. There's also the potential for cultural assimilation and pressure to adopt English in public life, which might make it harder to preserve local traditions. Another concern is the risk of greater dependency on federal funds, leading to reduced local autonomy. And finally, regulatory and legal shifts could create short-term economic disruptions as everyone adjusts to the new system. Now, looking at the pros of independence, full political sovereignty and self-determination would be possible. That means complete control over laws, education, culture, and language policy. Plus, there would be the ability to create economic policies tailored specifically to local needs without being limited by federal constraints. On the flip side, independence also comes with some significant challenges. The loss of guaranteed federal funding and programs could cause an economic shock, at least in the short term. There would be a need to build or expand institutions for things like defense, currency, and international relations, which could be, honestly, a pretty big undertaking. And there's the possible loss of automatic United States citizenship for future generations, unless that's specifically negotiated in advance. So, let's talk about free association. The pros include negotiated autonomy while still maintaining those key cooperative ties with the United States. There's greater control over local policy and cultural preservation, which is definitely important to a lot of people. Plus, there's the possibility of creating tailored economic and defense agreements that better fit local needs. On the flip side, though, free association has its cons. It requires careful negotiation and durable agreements, and honestly, that's not easy politically. Ambiguity can persist about jurisdiction and rights, which can be kind of confusing. And of course, financial stability depends on the terms of the arrangement and the level of external support. Now, if Puerto Rico stays a territory, there are some pros to consider. There's continuity of current legal and economic arrangements, so things stay familiar. It also avoids sudden changes and political upheaval, which can be reassuring for many. But the cons are significant too. There's a continued lack of voting representation and only partial federal benefits. Many residents feel this means perpetual uncertainty and, honestly, a kind of second-class status. And unless Congress acts, there are ongoing debates with no final resolution in sight. So, how would any change ripple across the mainland United States? Well, adding a new state would alter the composition of the U.S. Senate and House, and over time it could really reshape national politics. Campaign strategies would have to adjust to include Puerto Rican voters, and national parties would need to engage more deeply on issues affecting the island. It's definitely a big deal, with long-term effects to consider. It could also set a precedent for how the United States approaches other territories like Guam and the United States Virgin Islands. Culturally, admitting Puerto Rico as a state would strengthen bilingual and multicultural representation in the United States, bringing unique music, food, traditions, and perspectives into the national dialogue. A few practical hurdles are worth noting. Any final change in status requires congressional action. That means political will in Washington, District of Columbia, where debates about partisanship, budget commitments, and precedent matter. Transitioning legal and regulatory frameworks is complex, from tax law to social program eligibility to jurisdictional adjustments. And public opinion on the island is not monolithic. Different generations, regions, and communities have varied priorities. So, where does that leave us? The central principle is clear. Puerto Ricans should decide their future through a clear, fair, and binding democratic process. Whatever the outcome, statehood, independence, free association, or continuing in territorial status, the choice must reflect the will of the people and be accompanied by careful planning for the economic, political, and cultural transitions involved. If you care about policy details, here are a few key questions worth asking and exploring further. What specific federal programs and funding levels would change under statehood, and how soon would those funds arrive? How would tax changes affect households and businesses on the island, and what phased approaches could ease the burden? Could cultural protections be written into transition agreements to safeguard language and traditions? What would a negotiated free association look like in practice? And how have similar arrangements worked elsewhere? How would Congress likely respond politically, and what pathways could lead to a timely resolution? This is a conversation that affects millions of lives and has long-term implications for both Puerto Rico and the United States. It's not just a legal question. It's about identity, economics, fairness, and democratic rights. Thanks for spending these minutes with Traveling Kangaroo on this deep dive into Puerto Rico's future. If you'd like more detail, I can make a follow-up video that dives into recent referendum results and what they mean legally, or one focused on the economic models and projections for statehood versus independence. Tell me which you prefer. Don't forget to subscribe to Traveling Kangaroo, follow us on social media, and visit travelingkangaroo.com for more content and resources. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next journey.